You know, when you think about how we perceive the world around us, it's a lot like looking through a broken X-ray machine.
Right, yeah. You're just seeing the surface.
Exactly. Most of the time, you and I are just looking at the skin level. We see the polite smiles, the casual small talk, the diplomatic press conferences on the news.
And we assume there's this grace period when we meet someone.
Yeah, a social buffer zone. Like, it takes weeks or maybe months of grabbing coffees or chatting in the break room before they start to really see your cracks.
Your deepest insecurities, yeah. The structural fractures beneath the skin.
Right. It's a comforting illusion, honestly.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
We rely heavily on that buffer. We count on it to keep us safe while we carefully curate our public image, deciding exactly what we want to reveal and what we want to hide.
But what happens when you realize that broken X-ray machine can actually be fixed?
That's the terrifying part.
It really is. Because what if that social buffer doesn't exist for everyone? What if someone with the right training only needs, 4 minutes?
Just 4 minutes of casual conversation.
Yeah, 4 minutes to look right through the skin, see the fractures, completely dismantle your facade, and figure out exactly what makes you tick.
It fundamentally changes the entire paradigm of human interaction.
Yeah.
Suddenly you realize that every single micro-interaction is being analyzed.
Every choice of clothing, every hesitation in your voice.
Exactly. It's all just a data point being cataloged.
Yeah.
And that is, it's a terrifying but completely fascinating reality to confront.
And confronting that reality is basically our mission for this deep dive today. We are unpacking a really extensive, frankly mind-blowing interview transcript from the YouTube channel Decoded Genius.
Featuring Andrew Bustamante, yeah?
Right, a former undercover CIA officer. But I want to be super clear right up front. We are not here today just to swap cool Hollywood spy stories.
No jumping out of helicopters in tuxedos today.
Exactly. The goal here is to extract actionable intelligence from a worldview that operates entirely in the shadows.
We're looking past all those James Bond tropes to understand the bureaucratic, highly psychological, and sometimes incredibly mundane reality of intelligence gathering.
Because, honestly, the psychological mechanisms they use to recruit and manipulate foreign assets, they're the exact same mechanisms constantly operating in our everyday lives.
Whether we recognize them or not.
Right. So we're talking about how to read people, the literal neuroscience of building rapid trust, how to protect yourself from being played, and eventually how to navigate the incredibly complex geopolitical chessboard we find ourselves staring at today.
Which is quite a board right now.
Oh, absolutely. So for context, today is Wednesday, July 29th, 2026. Let's just jump right into the deep end here.
Let's do it.
So the very first thing that happens in this source material is Bustamante sitting down with his interviewer, right? A guy he has literally just met.
Right.
And within minutes, he completely profiles him out loud, just strips away all the pleasantries.
It is a masterful, almost surgical demonstration of observational mechanics.
Wild to read.
He doesn't just make generalized guesses. He systematically deduces the interviewer's entire life structure, his psychological baseline, all in real time.
Yeah, he literally looks at the guy and says, you're wealthy but humble, you're married to an extrovert, and you didn't come from a highly educated background. You built yourself from scratch.
And the interviewer's sitting there just absolutely stunned.
Because it's 100% true. And he immediately asks the question anyone would ask, which is, how did you know?
And this is where we start to fix that broken X-ray machine. Because the methodology isn't magic. It's hyper-observation coupled with deductive logic.
So how does he break it down?
Well, Bustamante points out the interviewer's clothing first. He notes the man is wearing a standard, unassuming shirt and pants.
So he isn't flashing his wealth with a massive designer logo across his chest?
Exactly. But he has on very specialized, expensive shoes, and his grooming, specifically, the precise shape of his beard, is carefully maintained without being overly flashy.
Right, because the interviewer self-funded his own media company. So the clothes tell the story of a self-made guy who values function over showing off.
It's stealth wealth. It denotes someone who has disposable income, but actively rejects societal status symbols in the traditional old money way.
Yeah, old money usually telegraphs itself through very specific, relaxed signifiers.
Right, whereas new money might overcompensate with luxury brands. But self-made money, especially in the modern digital era, it often manifests as extreme functionalism.
So the expensive shoes aren't for show.
No, they're for comfort during long days of grinding. The grooming isn't vanity. It's a disciplined routine. Bustamante reads these physical data points and reverse engineers the socioeconomic background.
Wow. But, okay, the marriage part, that's the deduction that really caught my attention.
Oh, that's a brilliant deduction.
Right. He deduced the guy was married to an extrovert simply by observing his quiet, reserved demeanor as a CEO. How do you jump from quiet CEO to extroverted wife?
So it goes to the core mechanics of human emotional wiring and energy management.
Oh,
If you are an introverted person who is successfully running a high-stress, forward-facing company, you are burning an immense amount of social and emotional energy every single day.
that makes sense.
Right. So the psychological assessment is that you must have a counterbalance at home to maintain equilibrium.
Ah, I see.
You need someone to absorb that residual stress, someone who generates social energy rather than consuming it to lift you up when the professional world tears you down.
So opposites don't just attract for the sake of variety.
Exactly. In high-functioning environments, they stabilize the system.
That is just wow. Okay, so he reads him like a book to establish dominance and demonstrate capability.
Right.
But the next step is diving into the real CIA playbook. How do they weaponize this kind of observation?
Well, Bustamante lays out a three-step framework for what the intelligence community calls rapid trust.
And the steps are simple on the surface, right? Listen, mirror, probe.
Let's break down the underlying mechanics of why this is so potent. In the intelligence world, you don't start with an asset, just, handing you a thumb drive full of state secrets.
Right, that's just the movies.
Exactly. You start with a target, and a target is essentially a locked vault. They are useless to you until you establish trust.
And undercover operatives don't have years to organically build this trust over, like, neighborhood barbecues.
No, they have to manufacture it rapidly,
Yep.
sometimes in a single encounter at a hotel bar.
And he emphasizes that step one, listen, is where almost everyone in the civilian world completely fails.
Oh, completely.
He gives this incredibly relatable but painfully true example of a terrible conversationalist.
The sandwich example.
Yes, imagine you're talking to someone, pouring your heart out about a problem you're having, and they just get up, walk to the kitchen, and start making a sandwich. And over their shoulder, they say, keep going, I'm listening.
It's a perfect illustration because it highlights the cognitive bottleneck of the human brain.
What do you mean by cognitive bottleneck?
Well, we like to think we can multitask, right? But the neurological reality is that active listening and complex physical sequencing are mutually exclusive.
Oh, wow, so you literally can't do both.
You literally cannot. Your brain cannot process complex emotional and factual data. The subtext, the tone, the micro-hesitations of another human being, while simultaneously sequencing the physical actions of finding the bread, opening the jars, and making a sandwich.
So you might hear the phonetic sounds of the words, but you are dropping all the emotional data packets.
Precisely. And the person speaking to you. Their mirror neurons register that disconnect instantly.
They feel discredited.
They feel like background noise. The vault door locks tighter.
I mean, it's why so many arguments and relationships spiral out of control. One person is scrolling on their phone, the other person is trying to express a vulnerable feeling, and the connection just dies because the attention isn't exclusive.
Exactly. Active, undivided listening is the absolute baseline.
Okay, so that's step one, but step two is where I have to throw a flag on the play.
Okay, let's hear it.
Step two is mirroring. Bustamante says if the target talks about a certain religion, he starts talking about it. If they lean in, he leans in. He mimics their pace, their vocabulary, their core ideologies. Right. If I'm sitting across from someone and they are intentionally mirroring my beliefs and my physical posture just to get me to agree with them, aren't they just manipulating me? How is that actually trust?
That tension you're feeling right now raises a crucial distinction in how different worlds define the exact same word.
Okay.
In civilian life, we think of trust as this sacred moral bond between two people built on authenticity.
Yeah, of course.
The CIA defines trust as a transactional utility.
Yeah.
It is simply a mechanism to lower your defensive barriers.
So it's purely functional.
Entirely.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the evolutionary biology of the brain. For hundreds of thousands of years, our survival depended on instantly identifying who was in our tribe and who was a threat.
Right, friend or foe.
By mirroring you, subconsciously showing you that I sit like you, I sound like you, I share your grievances, they short-circuit your amygdala, your brain's threat detection system.
Wow. So your brain relaxes and says, this person is part of my tribe?
Yes. It is absolute calculated manipulation, yes.
Yeah.
But it produces the exact behavioral outcome they need: manufactured trust.
It's like modern algorithmic sales, or the way social media feeds echo your own opinions back to you, but done in real time by a highly trained human being.
Exactly. And once they have established that manufactured trust, they move to step 3. Probe.
The probe, this is where the intelligence gathering actually begins, right?
Yes, you probe to map out their psychological boundaries, what Bustamante calls the red, yellow, and green lights.
Let's walk through that mechanism. So if I ask you a question about, say, your personal finances, how does your body react?
Right, if I cross my arms, break eye contact, and shut down entirely, that's a red light. You've hit a boundary.
And if you speak in vague generalities like, oh, I do all right, can't complain, that's a yellow light, proceed with caution.
But if I immediately lean forward and start bragging about the exact dollar amount in my portfolio, that's a green light.
And mapping those lights is critical because it tells the operative exactly which levers of vulnerability they can pull next.
Right. If greed is a green light, they know how to buy you. If pride is a green light, they know how to flatter you into revealing secrets.
And speaking of body language and reading those lights, I found this part of the source material incredibly vindicating.
The micro-expressions part?
Yes, everyone thinks they are a human lie detector because they watch some TV show about microexpressions. Oh, you looked up and to the left when you answered. That accesses the creative part of your brain, so you must be lying.
Right. Bustamante completely shatters this Hollywood myth.
Thank goodness.
He finds this civilian obsession with Universal tells almost laughable. The idea that a single gesture like foot tapping, lip biting, or a specific eye movement universally indicates deception in a stranger is cognitively unproven.
It's basically modern pseudoscience.
It essentially is.
Because there are a million innocent variables. Maybe their eyes just itch from hay fever. Maybe they didn't sleep well and their foot is tapping from too much caffeine.
Exactly. What an intelligence expert is actually looking for is not a universal tell, but a derivation from a baseline.
But here's the critical, often ignored reality. Establishing a genuine, scientifically valid baseline takes 3 to 6 hours of continuous observation in a controlled environment.
Right.
3 to 6 hours. Nobody has time for that in a casual conversation.
They don't.
Yeah.
You have to know what their normal blink rate is when they are perfectly relaxed. You have to know their baseline vocal cadence when they are telling the absolute truth about, like, what they had for breakfast.
So only after you have mapped that massive data set can you assign meaning to them suddenly blinking faster or their pitch rising when you ask about a missing file.
Correct. Without a rigorously established baseline, those so-called micro-expressions are just physiological noise.
That makes total sense. Now, understanding how they weaponize psychology on targets naturally leads to a much darker question.
How they pick the operatives.
Yes, because it turns out the movies lied to us again about the recruitment process.
They really did?
The CIA doesn't want a rogue Jason Bourne, and they aren't exclusively looking for Ivy League mathematical geniuses. According to Bustamante, they actively seek out average people.
And we have to define average in this context, right? Because they aren't looking for mediocrity.
Right. What are they looking for?
They are looking for a very specific, durable psychological profile.
Yeah.
People who are, in their own affectionate internal terminology, too dumb to quit.
I found his personal recruitment story to be one of the most revealing parts of the whole deep dive.
It's a crazy story.
So picture this. He's 27 years old. He's incredibly disillusioned with his military career, and he applies for the Peace Corps just to find an escape.
Right.
Out of nowhere, a pop-up appears on a government website.
Right.
He clicks it. Soon after, a FedEx envelope arrives at his front door.
Just a random envelope.
Literally just a FedEx envelope. And inside is a plane ticket, a rental car reservation, and a hotel booking for a mystery interview happening in 24 hours. There are no details, no agenda.
And he just packs a bag and goes.
He just goes.
Which is, in itself, the first major filter mechanism.
How so?
Think about the risk profile of a rational, well-adjusted civilian who receives an anonymous FedEx package instructing them to fly across the country tomorrow.
The immediate response would be extreme skepticism.
Right. They would see the logistical and safety red flags.
Most people would throw it in the trash thinking it's a scam.
Exactly. But Bustamante was so desperate for an adventure, so eager to escape his mundane routine of uniforms and alarm clocks, that he leaped without looking. He blindly went into the unknown.
And that extreme willingness to embrace ambiguity is exactly what the agency is screening for.
Precisely.
So he gets off the plane, follows the instructions, and walks into this waiting room. And he described it as looking like central casting for government bureaucrats.
This ocean of blending in.
Yeah. Right. Everyone is Caucasian, 25 to 32 years old, wearing sensible suits or pencil skirts. Extremely clean cut, no wild haircuts, no visible tattoos. He knew instantly he was in the right place because everyone just blended in.
But what the CIA actually saw in him during the grueling interview process, that is the psychological gut punch.
Yeah, let's get into that.
It is a profound, almost invasive psychological unmasking. During the vetting, after all the polygraphs and psychiatric evaluations, they essentially handed him a mirror and told him exactly who he was.
Which was what?
A person suffering from misaligned loyalty.
Let's unpack that because it's a fascinating vulnerability. He was constantly bouncing from person to person throughout his life, right? His mom, a commanding officer, a girlfriend. He was always looking for a surrogate authority figure to validate his intelligence and his effort.
Yes, and because human beings are inherently flawed, those people would eventually let him down.
They'd make a mistake or fail to appreciate him enough.
Exactly. And he would instantly pull his loyalty away and look for the next idol.
And the CIA evaluators looked at this psychological void and basically offer him the ultimate silver bullet.
They did. They essentially told him, you are desperate for a cause that will never betray you because human beings always will. We are offering you something larger than a human.
We are offering you the defense of the nation.
Right. An institution, a mission that you can be loyal to forever.
It's brilliant, but it's incredibly ruthless.
Highly ruthless.
They identified his deepest psychological wound, the desperate need for external validation and an unwavering anchor, and they filled it with the agency.
Right.
But if we pull the lens back, this reveals something massive about how the intelligence community operates internally.
It's a closed-loop system.
Yes, they recruit people who are slightly broken or endlessly searching, and they use the exact same psychological levers on their own officers that they teach those officers to use on foreign assets.
It is the architecture of an internal echo chamber. In intelligence circles, the framework used to manipulate assets is often referred to by the acronym RC.
Right. Reward, ideology, coercion, and ego.
Exactly. And the agency deploys all four of these internally to maintain absolute control over their workforce.
I want to break down that Rice framework deeply because the source gives this incredible, tragic example of an analyst.
The Burma analyst.
Yeah, so this guy's sole career specialty was the country of Burma, Myanmar. Now, for years, geopolitically speaking, nobody in Washington cared about Burma.
It was low priority.
But the CIA put this analyst in an echo chamber where his superiors constantly told him he was the smartest guy in the room. They told him his obscure reports were changing the world. They validated his ego so completely that he became utterly dependent on that praise, even though he was essentially talking into a void.
That is the ego and ideology components of Rice firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
They trap their best people in these synthetic loops of validation. You have to remember, intelligence officers cannot go home and brag to their neighbors about saving the world.
Right. They operate in complete secrecy.
Therefore, the only place they can receive validation, the reward, is from inside the building. The agency becomes their entire ecosystem of self-worth.
And the tragedy of the Burma analyst is that when the geopolitical winds shifted and Burma finally did become strategically relevant to the U.S., the analyst thought, this is it. I'm going straight to the Oval Office to brief the president.
But that's not what happened.
No. Instead, he was aggressively reminded that he was at the very bottom of a massive bureaucratic food chain. His reports were taken, his name was stripped off them, and they were passed up the ladder by politicians.
Which is brutal.
The validation he received for years wasn't real respect. It was just a mechanical tool used to keep him producing in obscurity.
Which brings us to the coercion aspect of Rice.
Right.
Once you are in that ecosystem, the coercion is systemic.
Right.
You are bound by draconian non-disclosure agreements, constant polygraphs, and the literal threat of federal treason charges if you step out of line.
So you are psychologically dependent on the validation and legally terrified of the exit. Okay, I have to draw an analogy here because I'm listening to this breakdown of psychological manipulation trapping people with ego and closed-loop validation, and I immediately think of corporate America.
The tech companies, right?
Yes. Think about the massive tech companies, Google, Meta, Apple. Don't they do a version of the exact same thing?
It's a very compelling parallel.
They give you free gourmet lunches, they do your laundry, they tell you you're changing the world by optimizing an app feature, they trap you with golden handcuffs, stock options, and ego validation so you never leave the campus. Is the CIA just a more intense, militarized version of Silicon Valley?
The psychological mechanisms are undoubtedly similar. However, Bustamante pushes back on that comparison heavily for one very stark, terrifying reason.
What's that?
Legal immunity.
How so?
If a tech CEO systematically weaponized your childhood trauma or your documented need for paternal validation to extract 80-hour work weeks from you, and it was uncovered in discovery, there would be massive, crippling civilian lawsuits for psychological abuse and hostile work environments.
Right, a corporation is ultimately bound by civilian labor laws.
Exactly. The intelligence community, however, operates under a congressional mandate that places national security explicitly above individual psychological welfare.
Oh, wow.
When you sign those papers, you sign your civilian rights away. You cannot sue the Central Intelligence Agency for manipulating your ego or intentionally fracturing your psyche to make you a better spy.
Wow. They are playing a completely different game in a different arena with a completely different rule book.
They absolutely are.
And speaking of rule books and how far ahead they operate, the source mentions how early the agency was using technology to profile these candidates.
Back in 2007.
Yeah, back in 2007 when Bustamante was recruited, they were already using rudimentary AI systems to scrub clandestine files and build predictive psychological profiles on recruits. Imagine what kind of behavioral modeling they're running today in 2026.
It highlights a massive technological asymmetry that the public rarely grasps. Think about the timeline. In 2007, the general public was just barely wrapping its head around the concept of the very first iPhone.
Right, social media was in its infancy.
Meanwhile, the intelligence community was already prompting closed-network, early-stage AI systems to analyze vast, classified databases of human behavior to predict loyalty.
It's crazy to think about.
It tells you that whatever commercial AI we are marveling at today, the chatbots, the image generators, the clandestine applications of predictive behavioral modeling are likely a decade, if not more, ahead of the civilian sector.
It really makes you wonder what kind of digital X-ray machine they are looking through right now.
Absolutely.
So this brings us to a really fascinating pivot in the material. We've talked about the psychology, but what about the day-to-day reality?
The operational reality.
Right.
When we look at the moral flexibility and the bureaucratic survival required inside the agency, it shatters another illusion. The movies always show spies agonizing over pulling a trigger, sweating in a sniper's nest. But the reality presented here is a lot more about navigating endless paperwork, institutionalized lying, and the logistics of leverage.
And leveraging whatever currency works in the moment. The mandate of the agency is singular. Acquire secrets that protect American interests.
Right.
The morality of how you acquire those secrets is highly, highly flexible. It is a deeply pragmatic ecosystem.
I mean, the example he gives of paying foreign informants with confiscated German pornography.
Yeah, that's a wild detail,
When I read that, it felt wildly outside the bounds of conventional government morality.
but perfectly logical within the framework of operational utility. Morality is culturally subjective, and the agency exploits that subjectivity.
So how does that work in practice?
Well, the source explains that European intelligence services, for example, view sexuality, vice, and morality very differently than the puritanical baseline of Americans.
If an undercover operative has a target who possesses critical, life-saving intelligence, and that target's primary motivator is something illicit but accessible through a partner agency like the German BND, the CIA will facilitate that exchange without hesitation.
Wow. So the currency itself is irrelevant.
Exactly. The intelligence is everything.
And speaking of bizarre currency, the story of the officer who was caught with $40 million in gold bars stashed in his garage.
It sounds like the plot of a Bond villain.
It totally does. But when Bustamante breaks down the logistics of how that actually happens, it makes terrifying sense.
It is the inevitable result of the bureaucracy of payoffs. You have to understand the mechanics of the black budget.
Right.
An operative doesn't just ask for $40 million in gold overnight. It would trigger every audit alarm in Congress. But gold is an extremely preferred currency in global espionage, particularly in unstable regions.
Because it's detached from fiat currency.
Exactly. It doesn't rely on the stability of the US dollar, the euro, or the yen. It is physically untraceable, universally valued, and doesn't hyperinflate based on a single nation's monetary policy.
So they just hoard it over time.
Over the course of 10 or 15 years, an officer files bureaucratic requests for operational funds. 4 gold bars for a warlord here, 10 gold bars for a corrupt minister there.
I see.
But if those assets don't pan out, or if the officer is skimming a percentage off the top of every transaction, they stockpile it. A decade of approved, compartmented bureaucratic requests slowly, quietly accumulates into a mountain of wealth hidden in a suburban garage.
The ultimate untraceable slush fund built one requisition form at a time. That is insane.
It is.
But what about the bigger moral compromises, the structural ones? The source brings up the historical example of the Mujahideen and Osama bin Laden during the Soviet-Afghan War.
This is the classic textbook scenario of blowback, which is a fundamental concept in intelligence theory.
And blowback is essentially the unintended, catastrophic long-term consequences of a short-term covert action, right?
Precisely. Intelligence agencies are designed to operate on immediate threats and short-term survival metrics.
So in the 1980s,
In the 1980s, the immediate existential threat was the Soviet Union. The pragmatic calculus was simple. The enemy of my enemy is my asset.
right.
If giving millions of dollars, Stinger missiles, and advanced training to a radical rebel group in Afghanistan bleeds the Soviet military dry today, the agency will do it.
But the tragic irony is that they are actively training the people who will attack them tomorrow.
Yes. The fact that those same weapons, that same training, and that same leader bin Laden would be turned against the United States decades later in 2001 is considered an acceptable or at least unavoidable cost of doing business in the present.
You cannot win tomorrow if you lose today.
Exactly. It is short-term problem solving with catastrophic long-term interest rates.
Wow. But here's the part about the internal bureaucracy that actually shocked me the most.
The faked orders.
Yes. We talk about this rigid, disciplined, militaristic agency, but Bustamante reveals that officers routinely fake direct orders.
It's surprisingly common.
A senior boss looks them in the eye, gives them a direct operational command. The officer walks out the door, does absolutely nothing, and then comes back and files a formal report saying, "Mission accomplished." How does an intelligence agency function if everyone is lying to their bosses?
This is where we see the collision of high-stakes espionage and mundane corporate bureaucracy.
Okay.
In any massive organization, survival often depends heavily on managing the ego of your superiors. In the CIA, a senior officer who mentors you is often referred to as a rabbi or a godfather, someone who protects you from the bureaucratic crossfire and advances your career.
So they are your shield.
Exactly. Now, if that rabbi gives you an order that you know is politically toxic, operationally stupid, or could get someone killed, you don't argue with them.
Because arguing destroys your relationship with your protector.
Precisely. You pay lip service, you fake the compliance, generate a vague report, and file it away to maintain the bureaucratic relationship.
It's just wild to think of national security functioning like a dysfunctional middle management office at a paper company.
It really is.
And it gets even crazier when you consider how they deal with the threat of actual traitors.
The deep paranoia of penetration.
Right. If the agency's internal culture is already built on lies, manipulation, and faking orders, how do they function knowing foreign governments? The Russians, the Chinese, are constantly trying to infiltrate them with moles.
It's a massive challenge.
Bustamante shares this chilling piece of internal CIA math. If you haven't found a mole in your department, you must assume there are 2.
Yes.
But if you have found 1 mole, you must assume there are 5. Why does finding 1 mean there are 5?
Is the statistical logic of counterintelligence. If you catch a mole, it generally means they made a mistake.
Right, they were clumsy or got greedy.
Or they were unlucky enough to trip an alarm.
But if your defenses were porous enough to let a clumsy operative in, it implies your security architecture is significantly weaker than you calculated.
Therefore, the highly skilled, disciplined penetrations, the ones who don't make mistakes, are undoubtedly still operating undetected in your blind spots.
So catching 1 is proof of a systemic failure, not a victory.
Exactly.
So how do they actually function under that suffocating level of paranoia?
Through the architecture of extreme compartmentalization.
The horizontal and vertical walls? I want to make sure we clearly define how this looks in practice.
Imagine the agency as a massive submarine with hundreds of watertight doors.
Okay.
Vertically, if you are a mid-level analyst working on the South America desk, your physical key card and your digital login credentials literally will not allow you to access or even view the existence of the East Asia files.
Okay, that makes sense. And horizontally?
Horizontally, if you are a junior analyst working in the Mexican drug cartels, you cannot see the high-level strategic directives regarding the Argentine economy, even though you're in the same vertical hemisphere.
The entire system is built on the fundamental assumption that any single person sitting next to you might be a traitor. Therefore, no single person can ever hold enough puzzle pieces to compromise the entire board.
Exactly. And the internal watchdogs monitor those digital walls relentlessly. If your credentials suddenly start poking around outside your designated geographical block, the system flags you instantly as an insider threat.
It is a functioning ecosystem built entirely on the premise of institutional distrust.
It truly is.
Now, before we transition into how we apply these spy skills to our own lives, we need to address a specific part of the source material.
Right.
Bustamante makes some very heavy, highly charged claims regarding the political atmosphere inside the agency.
He does.
He states there was a mass exodus of undercover CIA officers between 2018 and 2020, losing nearly 700 trained operators. He attributes this massive organizational destabilization to the whiplash of presidential transitions.
Specifically, he discusses the Trump administration's heavy use of covert action to shape media narratives, which he implies burned out operatives.
And then he directly criticizes the Biden administration's hiring policies, claiming they focused heavily on woke culture, prioritizing LGBTQ and handicapped demographics over traditional experienced operators, which he argues weakened the agency's lethal edge.
And as we unpack this, it is crucial that we maintain our analytical distance here. We are not here to endorse Bustamante's political viewpoints.
Exactly. We are not taking a stance on the Biden administration's diversity initiatives, nor are we validating his specific characterization of the Trump administration's utilization of the intelligence apparatus.
Right. Our objective is to impartially report on the content provided and make it clear we are just analyzing the mechanics of his argument as a data point. We are examining how a former operative perceives the shifting of the executive branch and how those extreme political swings theoretically impact the internal culture of a clandestine agency.
Beautifully said. We are looking at the engine, not voting for the driver. So, analyzing the mechanics of his argument, his core thesis is that when leadership swings wildly from one political extreme to another every 4 to 8 years, the agency loses its institutional memory.
Yes. The seasoned operators leave, and the agency morphs from a stable intelligence gatherer into a reactive political tool.
Which loops right back to the theme of bureaucratic survival we just discussed.
Exactly. If the internal culture feels politically compromised or unstable, the individual officer's priority immediately shifts from external national security to internal personal survival.
They stop taking risks.
And if they stop taking risks, they stop gathering critical intelligence.
Right. If you're constantly worried about getting fired for stepping on a new political landmine, you just stop walking.
It's human nature.
Which leads us to a fascinating application of these survival skills. What happens when you take this hypervigilant, deeply pragmatic training and apply it to the civilian world?
Well, Bustamante took his spy training and built a business and life framework out of it called SADRAT.
Yes, SADRAT. S-A-D-R-A-T. Spot, assess, develop, recruit, handle, terminate. It is the chronological life cycle of a spy asset.
And the deep dive here focuses heavily on that final letter, the T, terminate.
Bustamante says the average shelf life for a secret-generating spy is brutally short, only 3 to 5 years.
At a very short window.
After that window, they get caught, they get killed, or they simply get promoted out of the department where they had useful access. So by necessity, the CIA has to be absolute experts at cutting people off.
And this is where the intelligence community's ruthless application of the 80-20 rule comes into play, Pareto's principle.
Right, the economic principle that 80% of your outcomes come from 20% of your input.
Exactly. The intelligence community looks at human capital through this lens relentlessly. They calculate that 80% of their productive, actionable intelligence comes from just 20% of their recruited assets.
So what about the other 80%?
The other 80% of the assets are massive resource drains. They consume the operative's time. They require operational funding, they demand protective details, but they yield very little of value.
So what do they do?
To survive and maintain operational velocity, an operative must systematically terminate the bottom 80% to steal back resources and reinvest them in the top 20%.
And the wild part is that he applies this exact same termination metric to everyday civilian life.
He does.
He says 80% of your business revenue comes from 20% of your clients. 80% of the time you spend mindlessly wandering around the gym is wasted. All the physiological gains come from the 20% of intense, focused effort.
It makes sense in business and fitness.
It does, but then he applies it to personal relationships. He argues that 80% of the friends in your life are actively holding you back, draining your emotional battery and keeping you stagnant. His advice: you need to cut them off, stop texting them back, drop them. Now, I have to push back hard on this. I hear this, and I understand the energy management aspect, but human beings aren't spreadsheets. If I apply CIA termination metrics to my marriage or my college friends, Doesn't that inherently destroy the authenticity of the relationship?
It sounds sociopathic. Right?
Are we really supposed to view human connection purely as a resource drain?
It absolutely sounds cold, borderline sociopathic on its face. But if you reframe it through the specific lens of Bustamante's own psychological evolution, it becomes a profound lesson in thermodynamics.
Thermodynamics.
Yeah, the conservation of emotional energy. Remember the baseline they recruited him for?
Yeah.
He lived with active distrust. He kept everyone at arm's length because he expected betrayal.
Right.
What he realized over years of training is that active distrust, constantly maintaining walls, dodging people, assuming everyone is a potential threat, consumes massive amounts of psychological energy. It is exhausting to play defense 3-4-7.
Right. He called it an additive element. Keeping people out actually added anxiety and barriers to his daily life.
Precisely. The evolution of his mindset was realizing that instead of expending all his energy actively fighting to keep 100% of people away, he simply needed to establish a rigid threshold.
Meaning?
You make people earn their way into the 20%. You don't actively fight or argue with the bottom 80%. You just passively terminate your energetic investment in them.
You just let the relationship wither naturally.
Exactly. By making trust a metric that must be earned over time, rather than a threat that must be actively repelled every day, you radically simplify your mental bandwidth. It's not about being malicious. It's about aggressively protecting your finite time and emotional capacity.
It's the concept of starving the distractions to feed your priorities.
Well said.
But if we are going to ruthlessly cut 80% of our distractions out, it begs the question, what is actually worth our energy? What truly drives human behavior when you strip away the noise?
Bustamante draws a very stark, illuminating line here between the primal human operating system and the deeply distracted modern American.
He boils it down to the 4 primal drivers: safety, food, shelter, and community. These are the ancient, non-negotiable baseline needs. But his argument is that because Americans generally have these primal needs met, we aren't usually dodging predators or foraging for berries. Our brains are hijacked by entirely superficial, invented pressures.
We are controlled by fleeting emotions, digital relationships, and artificial time constraints.
We essentially live at the very top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And because the foundation is secure, we've built a whole new, fragile architecture of neuroses up there.
To illustrate this, he paints this incredibly vivid, cinematic picture to contrast the U.S. with the developing world.
Oh, the Vietnam story.
Yes. He talks about being in Vietnam, standing in the absolute chaos of street traffic, and seeing an 11-year-old girl driving a scooter.
Which is already crazy.
And standing right behind her is a 7-year-old who is holding a 3-year-old. 3 young children balancing on a motorbike in a developing nation. One slip of the wrist, one pothole, one swerving truck, and all 3 of them die instantly.
That is visceral, primal survival.
That image is so potent because it instantly recalibrates our understanding of stakes. In much of the developing world, the daily cognitive load of the average person is completely dedicated to primal survival. Will we secure enough calories today? Will we survive the transit to the market? Will a waterborne disease take my child?
The margin for error is absolute zero.
Exactly.
And then you zoom back to America, and what are we having a panic attack over? We are stressed to the point of a breakdown because we don't know if our mother-in-law is going to make a passive-aggressive comment about the turkey at the Thanksgiving dinner table.
Right.
Or we feel this immense, crushing sense of time pressure from our calendars, so we make terrible health decisions and eat a bowl of sugary processed cereal for dinner just to save 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Are wealthy, we are physically safe, and we are absolutely miserable because we invent pressure.
It is the paradox of modern convenience, and it's rooted in our neurobiology.
How so?
When your primal needs are automated by a first-world society, your brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, doesn't just power down and go to sleep. It is evolutionarily designed to constantly scan for danger.
So, in the absence of a tiger, it looks for new, smaller threats to elevate to a life or death status.
Exactly. An unreturned email from your boss triggers the same tribal rejection fear as being cast out of a hunter-gatherer group. A traffic jam feels like an existential crisis because your brain is misfiring its stress hormones.
It's like trying to fix a smartphone screen that's glitching by downloading new apps, when the reality is that the motherboard is melting.
Great analogy.
We are endlessly trying to life hack our software inbox zero, relationship counseling, time management seminars when our physical hardware is failed.
So true.
So how do you actually apply this to your own life? The insight he offers here is profound. If you want to fundamentally change your mental health or the trajectory of your success, stop trying to manage the superficial pressures. Stop rearranging the deck chairs. Change a primal base.
Exactly. Go directly to the root code of the operating system.
Change your physical shelter. Move to a new city. Change your job. Radically alter the physical environment you exist in.
Or change your food.
Yeah, he literally points out that changing what you eat alters your gut biome, which changes your sleep architecture, which dramatically alters your cognitive focus within hours. If you force an alteration to the primal inputs, shelter, food, community, the downstream superficial stresses often resolve themselves because you have forced your brain to adapt to a new foundational reality.
It's incredibly practical advice.
Now, zooming out from the internal ecosystem of our own minds, we need to look at the global ecosystem.
The big picture.
Right. Let's look at the 2026 geopolitical chessboard through the eyes of an intelligence insider who sees the fractures in the X-ray.
Let's do it.
And once again, as we dive into this analysis, we are impartially reporting the source's strategic predictions and assessments. Bustamante makes definitive claims regarding the current administration's handling of global conflicts, referencing a bloated ceasefire in Iran, blaming previous administrations for missteps, and critiquing reliance on media cycles.
And we do not endorse or condemn any of the political figures, parties, or foreign policies mentioned. Our job is strictly to analyze the geopolitical game theory as presented in the text.
Exactly. So let's look at the mechanics of that game theory. The text presents a world locked in grinding, expensive stalemates. Look at the situation with Iran.
The U.S. engaged militarily, expecting a swift, overwhelming 72-hour decimation of Iranian capabilities. Instead, it devolved into what Bustamante perfectly terms a bloated ceasefire.
It's this weird, highly tense, not war, not peace limbo state.
Precisely. And it's driven entirely by the concept of face-saving. Iran cannot officially back down or capitulate because doing so would instantly destroy the Ayatollah's domestic control and regional credibility.
They cannot look weak to their proxies.
Right. And the United States cannot look weak either. But neither side is willing to commit the overwhelming, catastrophic blood and treasure required to secure a definitive, final military victory. The political cost is simply too high.
So what happens? They just let it grind to a halt, similar to what we saw with the static, brutal trench warfare in Ukraine. Both sides just hunker down and wait for the global media cycle to get distracted.
Yes.
Bustamante actually predicts the government is just hoping a crisis flares up elsewhere, maybe a violent turnover of leadership in Cuba. So the media cameras pivot, the public gets outraged about something new, and everyone just quietly forgets about Iran. It is foreign policy executed by public relations attrition.
Which is a remarkably cynical but historically accurate view of how modern conflict rarely resolves cleanly. It just dissolves into the background noise of the next crisis.
But there are conflicts that cannot just fade away into the background noise. Let's talk about the nuclear threat, because the stakes don't get higher.
Absolutely.
The interviewer asks him point blank, Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, who pushes the button first?
His analysis of this question is a fascinating study in regime structure and risk calculus. He identifies Kim Jong-un as the most likely to launch a nuclear weapon.
Which surprised me. Why him over Putin, who is actively engaged in a massive European conflict?
Because of strategic maturity and internal accountability. Kim Jong-un inherited his power. He didn't build it from scratch.
Right.
He is viewed practically as a deity within his own borders. He doesn't have a powerful oligarchy of billionaires he has to keep wealthy and happy to survive, like Putin does.
So fewer constraints.
But more importantly, structurally, he operates with a blank check from Russia and China. As long as North Korea acts like a chaotic, unpredictable wild card launching practice missiles over the ocean, threatening South Korea and Japan, all of the Western military anxiety and diplomatic bandwidth is focused there.
Ah, I see.
North Korea is a highly useful, noisy distraction that allows Beijing and Moscow to operate quietly in the shadows. Because Kim is protected by those superpowers, he has the least to lose and the most incentive to be reckless.
Okay, so Kim is the most likely to launch, but Putin is the most likely to deploy. And the distinction he makes there is terrifying.
Launching implies an intercontinental ballistic missile. It implies a return address. The moment a missile silo lights up on a thermal satellite, it guarantees immediate, mutually assured destruction from the U.S. arsenal.
Right, which nobody wants.
Putin, according to the source, is a master of the gray zone. He understands that a traditional launch is suicide. So if he uses a nuclear weapon, it won't be a missile. It will be a suitcase nuke.
The theoretical scenario he paints is chilling in its simplicity. A tactical nuclear device packed into a standard commercial shipping truck, driven quietly through the Allied state of Belarus, directly into the heart of Kiev, and detonated.
And the reason he would choose that method is because it creates the ultimate strategic freeze.
Yeah.
Plausible deniability.
How does that work?
If a truck detonates in Kiev, wiping out the leadership, you can track the radiation, you can trace the truck's route back to Belarus, maybe, but you cannot definitively immediately prove on the world stage that Vladimir Putin personally pushed the button.
Wow.
And if you cannot definitively prove it to the international community, the United States cannot legally or morally justify launching retaliatory nuclear missiles at Moscow.
Right.
The confusion paralyzes the response. Putin achieves the devastation of his enemy without triggering the immediate apocalyptic retaliation.
That is the grim, shadowy reality of 2026 warfare. But amidst all these stalemates and nuclear threats, who is actually winning the long game? Who is the ultimate victor in this landscape?
Bustamante doesn't hesitate. It's China, Xi Jinping.
Yes, Putin has to constantly juggle his oligarchs. If they lose their wealth, he loses his life. Kim is isolated in a hermit kingdom, but Xi Jinping has meticulously created what Bustamante calls a self-licking ice cream cone.
I love that phrase, but what does it actually mean in terms of governance?
Well, it refers to a system that perpetuates itself flawlessly, requiring no outside input. Through continuous rolling anti-corruption campaigns, she systematically eradicates any rising political or economic competition within the Chinese Communist Party.
Right, he does it under the guise of maintaining ideological purity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He has achieved absolute, unquestioned control over a massive, self-sufficient economy with an industrial manufacturing capacity that dwarfs Russia's. The system cleans itself of threats automatically.
China is a monolith. But the dark horse in all of this, the country everyone in the West seems to be overlooking, India.
India is playing a brilliant, arguably the most sophisticated geopolitical hand right now.
Oh, absolutely.
If China is focused on first-world military and economic hegemony, India is rapidly stepping in to become the indispensable supply chain manufacturing superpower of the entire world.
He describes their strategy as playing mom against dad.
They maintain massive trade ties with the United States, keeping the tech sector happy and avoiding tariffs. But simultaneously, they ignore Western sanctions to buy cheap oil from Russia and maintain deep trade networks with China.
So they are basically playing everyone.
They are essentially allied with everyone, the US, Russia, China, and enemies with almost no one except their historical friction with Pakistan. They are sitting right at the center of the global hub, indispensable to everyone's economy, making a massive profit while the superpowers exhaust themselves fighting over ideology.
It is the ultimate position of non-aligned leverage. They hold the physical supply chains hostage while the others fight over the conceptual throne.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most sobering realization of our deep dive.
Yeah, this part hit hard.
We just talked about all these global threats, Russia's gray zone tactics, China's monolith, Iran's stalemates. But Bustamante drops a hammer on the United States itself.
What is our greatest vulnerability? It isn't a hypersonic missile. It isn't a cyber attack on the grid.
No.
It's the fact that Americans actively, venomously hate each other. He cites internal polling indicating that roughly 40% of Americans believe the other 60% are actively anti-democracy, evil, or seeking to destroy the country. The artificial political lines have morphed into genuine tribal warfare.
We expend all our national energy, our media bandwidth, and our money fighting internally over culture wars, which is an absolute gift to every foreign adversary. But the real ticking time bomb he introduces the concept that ties all of this together is economic parity.
This is a deeply counterintuitive concept for most civilians to grasp. We are raised in democracies to believe that equality and fairness are inherently good, stabilizing forces.
Right.
But in the cold math of global geopolitics, equality is the most dangerous state possible.
Right. The only reason the United States has been relatively peaceful and comfortable for the last several decades, so comfortable that we worry about Netflix algorithms instead of food security, is because we have been an unmatched apex predator. We are so far ahead in military spending, economic output, and technological innovation that no one challenges us directly.
But China is rapidly closing that gap. Economists predict true economic parity where the GDP and influence of the U.S. and China are exactly equal within 7 to 10 years.
That's so.
Yes. And when you have two apex predators occupying the exact same ecosystem with equal strength, the friction becomes cataclysmic. Look at history. The Thucydides trap tells us that when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, the result is almost always massive conflict.
He points out that there are 160 other nations out there watching this happen. Right now, they cooperate with the U.S. out of sheer necessity. But when there are two equal superpowers, the world fractures into camps.
Right.
The U.S. and China will have to pour every single resource they have into fighting each other just to maintain the #1 slot. Because in a bipolar world, whoever falls to #2 is immensely vulnerable.
It exhausts the nations. It pulls all focus away from internal stability, infrastructure, and domestic prosperity, and redirects it entirely into an existential zero-sum global competition.
It's so severe that Bustamante has formulated a literal exit strategy for his family.
Yeah, he's leaving.
He is taking his kids and leaving America in 2027. He wants his kids to gain a global perspective because he feels Americans have grown too spoiled by convenience to realize how fragile their reality actually is.
But more practically, he is altering his primal base.
Exactly. He wants his family physically safe from domestic instability, and he wants his children to learn a second language right now so their brains are primed to learn Chinese later. Because he genuinely believes that knowing Chinese will be a mandatory survival skill in a world defined by U.S.-China parity.
It's the ultimate application of intelligence gathering, spotting the macro trend and acting on it decisively before the majority even realizes the weather is changing. He's choosing a new physical shelter to protect his family's future.
But this leaves you and me in a really tough spot. We can't all just pack up and move to a new country in 2027. So how do we navigate this? We are swimming in information warfare, algorithms designed to make us angry, domestic division, and geopolitical chaos. How do we find the truth?
Bustamante offers a foundational intelligence skill for this exact problem, and it's called vetting. To explain it, he references the mental models of the billionaire investor Charlie Munger.
Yes. The idea that you do not truly hold an opinion until you can argue the opposing side's argument better than they can?
In intelligence, you never, ever rely on a single source, especially if that source confirms your existing bias. If you want to know what is actually happening in the world, you must force yourself to consume diametrically opposed sources.
So reading both sides.
You read the hard left news coverage of a political event, and then you force yourself to read the hard right news coverage of the exact same event.
And where the two narratives agree, where the Venn diagram overlaps on the basic facts, that tiny sliver in the middle is likely the objective truth.
Exactly.
Where they wildly differ, where the emotional rhetoric flares up and the adjectives get aggressive, that is the manipulation. That is the spin. If you are only listening to the side that validates your feelings, you are the exact mark they are looking for.
It requires immense psychological discipline to intentionally consume information that angers you, that contradicts your worldview, and causes cognitive dissonance. But it is the only way to build a functional, calibrated radar in an era of weaponized disinformation.
Okay, let's take a breath and zoom out. We have covered incredible ground today. We started by looking through that broken X-ray machine at the microtactics of a 4-minute psychological assessment.
Right.
We unpacked the myth of the human lie detector and the neurological reality of mirroring to manufacture rapid trust.
We ventured inside the bureaucratic closed-loop machine of the CIA, seeing how they actively seek out the average in the searching, and how they use the Rice Framework reward, ideology, coercion, ego, to trap their own people in echoes of synthetic validation.
We looked at the grim math of malls where 1 equals 5, the reality of faking orders to survive the office politics of espionage, and the absolute ruthlessness of the CEDRAT framework, passively terminating the bottom 80% to protect your emotional bandwidth for the top 20%.
We contrasted the visceral primal survival of the developing world with the superficial neuroses-driven stress of the American experience, realizing that true, lasting change only comes from shifting our primal foundations, our food, our shelter, our community.
And finally, we stared down the barrel of 2026 geopolitics. The bloated, face-saving stalemates, the horrifying logic of a suitcase nuke for plausible deniability, the self-licking ice cream cone of Chinese dominance, and the terrifying countdown to economic parity that has a former spy packing his bags for a new country.
It is a lot to process.
It is. It is that murky, complicated reality of human behavior on both an individual and a global scale.
It is murky. But the tools to navigate it, vetting your sources, recognizing when you are being mirrored, protecting your primal baseline, are surprisingly accessible if you are willing to practice the discipline required to use them.
Which brings us to our final thought. Towards the end of the interview, the host asks Bustamante for his single most potent yet boring piece of advice for avoiding manipulation in everyday life. And his answer is profound.
It really
It's
is.
simply silence.
It is the ultimate shield against elicitation.
So this is what we want you to mull over today. Think about the next time you feel backed into a corner, the next time you feel someone pulling your strings in a negotiation, or your partner dragging you into an emotional argument, or a salesman pushing a manufactured sense of urgency on you to sign a contract.
Just wait.
What happens if you just stop talking? If you just look at them, hold eye contact, and let the air in the room get thick? Do you have the discipline to let them fill the void? Because the person who rushes to fill the silence is almost always the one who gives up their power.
A fascinating and incredibly difficult test of will.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden machinery of human behavior and global intelligence. We'll be back next time with another stack of sources to decode.